Good morning to everyone who has signed on for the Housing Stability Council meeting. We're still admitting people to our virtual meeting room, and just in another minute or two, we will get the meeting started. Thanks for joining us today. Okay. Good morning, everyone. It is Friday, July 7th, 2023. This is the monthly meeting of the Oregon Housing Stability Council. And could we begin with a call of the roll, please?
Thank you, Chair Hall. For the record, Councilmember Farrell and Councilmember Sandoval have been excused today, and Councilmember DeFontoren will be joining us momentarily. Chair Hall.
Here.
Councilmember Lee.
Here.
Councilmember Mena.
Here, sorry.
Thank you. Councilmember Rogers.
Here.
Thank you. We have quorum, Chair Hall.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. Now we're going to go to our public comment list. And it looks like we've got 6 people signed up today. Rick Solon Jr. Rick, are you on the line?
One moment. I'm looking for Rick right now. All right, go ahead, Rick.
Yeah, hello.
You're on.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Thank you, members of the committee. As always, I am speaking as a member of the Milpas 5 Tenant Council. I'm unsure if you're aware that we've recently gone through a management change, but we still are continuing to see problems with lack of follow through from ownership on making the changes that have been we've been asking for to improve security and to make this a safe and stable place to live. This has just been an ongoing thing. We've asked for audit of the background checks, and that doesn't seem to have happened. The new management company is actually the new lease that they are proposing. So they're not even required to do background checks, which seems very suspicious. You just have no faith in the process at this point because the management hasn't acted. And as far as we are aware, you guys are the proper oversight body, and it doesn't seem like anybody is being held accountable. We've asked for accountability with the new money that you guys just granted to CDP. And there's been, as far as we've been told, there's been no plan for accountability for those funds that they actually go where they say they're going to go. It just seems like a whole lot of catering to the landlords with no catering to the tenants at all. And it's just very, very frustrating that for an organization that says you're trying to put tenants first and be tenant-centric, we see zero effort in that direction from anybody that is any sign of accountability, any sign of consequences for the lack of security and safety and cleanliness that has happened here over the last several years. And it's continuing to be a problem, and we keep asking for changes, and no changes seem to happen. Yeah, we have a new management company, but that doesn't, it's been only a month since they've taken over. Not really enough time to evaluate them per se, but we still see no accountability and no effort at accountability that is at least not that has been publicly available. That's what we're asking for: accountability and transparency.
Okay, thank you very much. Neil Whitaker.
Hello, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Respected members of the council, as Rick touched on, Milepost 5 has recently received some conflicting information about the criminal screening. Essentially, the new property manager is saying one thing, and the information we've gotten from OHCS is the opposite. So I'm gonna read directly from the new property manager's lease right here. Studio's new lease agreement states, and I quote, "Owner has no obligation to obtain criminal background checks on any residents and bears no responsibility or liability related to the criminal background or actions, whether past, present, or future, of any person, even if owner has actually run a criminal background check on applicants. Residents shall not rely on the fact that owner may have run a criminal background check on residents or any other applicant when deciding whether to enter into this agreement. Background checks are limited to the information actually reviewed and are not a guarantee that a person with a criminal background does not reside at the residential community. Owner has not made and does not make any representations as to the background of any existing or future tenant, and owner is under no obligation to run background checks on any existing tenant or future applicant." So now I'll read what OHCS has said on the matter. Quote, "Persons with a lifetime requirement to register as a sex offender and those that have been convicted of manufacturing controlled substances in public housing are ineligible for admission to LIHTC financed housing. LIHTC properties are required to have a tenant selection plan that includes screening for criminal history. Each property is allowed to set its own standards for criminal history other than the two mentioned above." Continuing, "Owners and managers of affordable housing financed by OHCS submit a rent roll at least annually. During a file review, OHCS staff examine tenant files to ensure eligibility is documented. A criminal background check for each adult household member must be documented in the file. When OHCS performs a compliance review, staff checks tenant files to confirm that eligibility screening, including criminal history check, was performed prior to tenant admission." So I guess, can you help us clarify? We'd like an answer today, because this is pretty strange language. So the taxpayers who live inside and the ones who live directly next to your housing, what is the policy here? Who is more correct, please? Take my answer off the air. Thank you.
Thank you. Brian Hoop.
Chair Hall and council members, good morning. My name is Brian Hoop, Executive Director of Housing Oregon. I use he, him pronouns. On behalf of Housing Oregon and our board of directors, we are deeply disappointed in the recently announced LIFT rental NOFA funding recommendations on the agenda for today's meeting. I've emailed each of you these comments in more detail. I apologize, council member, is it Giscombe? Sorry if I mispronounced your name, and Caleb, I'll email you as well. I don't have contact info for you, council member Giscombe. We support the progress made with OHCS's current policy awarding points for partnering with culturally specific organizations. But we also believe the policy is missing the mark to advance equity and racial justice by not prioritizing state resources to community-based, mission-driven nonprofits with years of experience as lead developers, specifically culturally specific and rural-based developers. Separate from the 3 housing authorities that were awarded funds, there were no nonprofits or culturally specific organizations funded that were lead developers. OHCS has missed another opportunity by not recognizing the value of your longtime nonprofit partners who reinvest their developer fees back into the community for perpetuity. We are disappointed again that capacity building for these long-term partners will lag further due to these recommendations. Housing Oregon intends to follow up with OHCS and the council with recommendations addressing these concerns. Here are a few highlights from the written comments shared with you. First, Housing Oregon asked OHCS to study Washington State's approach as a model that might work in Oregon to advance affordable housing development. One of their funding agency limits access to funding opportunities to local governments, local housing authorities, nonprofit community or neighborhood-based organizations, and federally recognized Indian tribes. Another funding agency includes clearly defined funding criteria, limiting funding to nonprofit organizations and for-profits that partner with nonprofits as co-owners with a reasonable expectation to be able to acquire the property after year 15. Second, of the projects including culturally specific organizations as junior partners, 2 are actively involved in a Housing Oregon project we call Equitable Partnerships in Affordable Housing. We're developing recommendations we'll share when completed. The project is addressing how to improve the junior partner relationship between culturally specific organizations and affordable housing developers. And third and final, Housing Oregon supports creating a deep and predictable pipeline of projects across the state, which reduce the scattered shot approach across the state and provide smaller community-based and culturally specific nonprofit organizations better access to housing development resources. We appreciate OHCS's commitment to addressing housing stability in our state, and we look forward to the possibility of future collaboration with you to address these critical issues to strengthen the LIFT program. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Melanie Keebler.
Good morning, Chair Howell and council members. My name is Melanie Keebler. I am the mayor of Bend, and I'm here to communicate my enthusiastic support for a project on your agenda today, the College View Apartments housing proposal in Bend, and urge the council to approve the recommended LIFT funding award of $8.3 million. These 59 new homes are sorely needed in our community where far too many of our residents are cost burdened due to high housing prices and rising rents. As you may know, the median home price in Bend now exceeds $700,000, and we have a high number of residents living unsheltered and homeless in our community. Though we've been making strides in getting more housing of all types on the ground as quickly as possible, subsidized affordable housing remains one of our best tools to relieve the cost burden and keep people from being forced to live on the streets. As your staff report highlights, the College View Apartments development is a true public sector partnership in our community. Housing Works took on the project, Deschutes County surplus the land, and City of Bend contributed both local funds as well as federal CDBG funds. We welcome the state of Oregon's partnership in funding this development. And I'm also excited that Housing Works has partnered with our Latino Community Association to help our Spanish-speaking community access these new housing options. The College View Apartments development aligns with the goals of the council and our statewide housing plan, as well as with the goals of the Bend City Council. By approving this LIFT funding, you will truly be changing lives in Bend. Thank you for your consideration and your support of this important affordable housing development in my community.
Thank you. Tom Vincent.
Chair Hall, I do not see Tom Vincent's name on the list. However, Tom, if you're joining by phone only, please use the raise hand function of *9.
And I do see we have a raised hand. Okay.
Okay, go ahead. To remove the mute is *6. You are still muted. *6 will unmute you.
Well, should we go to the next person on the list and then try coming back to Mr. Vincent?
Yes.
Okay, let's do that. Amber Cook.
Good morning, Housing Stability Council. Last month, I shared that the surveys council members requested be sent to Milepost 5 residents were not going to work because they require a move-in date, and that means residents can be identified. Anyone who works in housing and works with renters and landlords knows how much low-income renters are harassed and victimized by the power imbalance that carries through the legal system and leaves renters afraid to speak out when their landlord violates their rights. I reminded the council that Milepost 5 has a tenant council that will help them create a survey that will get responses. But in the intervening month, no one from OHCS contacted us. That survey is the single only thing the council requested when they awarded CDP the additional $3 million in taxpayer money 2 months ago to fix things they've already been given millions of taxpayer dollars to fix but spent elsewhere. No documentation, transparency, or accountability was stipulated. Now we've just been given new leases that are all about us residents signing away all our rights. In it, we have dozens of unheard of obligations to CDP, but they bear no responsibility for anything that happens to us as a result of not repairing or making the property safe or secure. As a member of the Milepost 5 Tenant Council who's done tenant work since CDP was granted the tax credits for Milepost 5 4 years ago, we are sick of being ignored and dismissed, of being treated as the only parts of the equation that have no say and no voice. Done with hearing nice phrases like we elevate and we center renters when that is not how we're being treated. We want OHCS to do real We want OHCS to do real surveys that are safe for residents to complete so that you show Milepost 5 residents that their state housing agency gives a damn about them. As you tour the property and see the disgusting living conditions for yourselves. When a thriving property is downgraded to a slum and remains that way for 4 years, you should want to see it for yourself before dashing off checks for millions of dollars. We want OHCS to update us, the residents, through the Milepost 5 Tenant Council monthly on actions being taken and the results to show you're making sure the $3 million is spent here and on more than just the selfishness of the roof that will allow them to raise rents even higher every year. We want to see OHCS enforce landlord-tenant law and tax credit mandates and OHCS's own stated policies with the property owners. We want OHCS to take responsibility for allowing so many ineligible tenants to be rented to at Milepost 5 under your watch while being furnished with copious proof and documentation. We want OHCS to strike down provisions in the new lease that clearly violate the intent of landlord-tenant law and seek to make CDP untouchable for current and future violations. We want the 2022 rent raises rescinded as the owners and the property did not comply with even the basics, the ORS 90.100 essentials for charging rent.
Excuse me, but we are past our 3 minutes, so if you could wrap up your thought, please.
Absolutely, just one last. We look forward to hearing from a new liaison with OHCS who will work with the Milepost 5 Tenant Council this month. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll try Tom Vincent again.
Yes, can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Please begin.
Oh, great. Thank you. Chairman Bell and members of the council, I am also talking about Milepost 5. I wanted to mention that neighbors have again been reporting people smoking meth, people showing people how to access the side doors merely by reaching around. And the person that was doing this is a well-known individual who had been evicted from the building in the past, and then remarkably had been apparently allowed back into the building and then evicted again, and was threatening neighbors to the point where they felt like they had to consider defending themselves with their garden tools. There have been cars coming and going, and that any reasonable person might look at this and assume that there is some sort of drug dealing going on. All of these problems that have been talked about now for literally years could be solved by the simple expedient, which has been brought up many times, of having proper security. At least in the past, I don't know where it's at now, the only security that existed was one person at nighttime. There was no one in the daytime other than a normal office person. And then there was in the weekends, there was no one on the weekend days. It would seem to me that after receiving $3 million in taxpayers' money, and that if you own an apartment building, essentially all of your maintenance costs have just been taken care of by somebody else. to a very, very high degree. There ought to be some money left over to be able to have some sort of proper security, to have an extra person walking the perimeter until the general knowledge is within elements of the community that Milepost 5 is not a place to come to deal drugs, engage in prostitution, or come and go at will. This seems like an extremely simple thing to do. I remain completely confused why that apparently hasn't happened. If it has happened, then you should probably issue some sort of notice to that effect. I am also concerned by the language of that new lease, as I think any reasonable person would. I imagine that Chairman Bell or members of the council would not be thrilled by living next door to a similar situation where language like that was being used. There has not been any sort of accountability or any sort of report about what happened in this situation over the last 2 years. That would seem to me that if you want to avoid this happening again in the future, that's the only way that's going to do it. And this is a very common thing in situations like this when things go astray. I urge you to spend the time to actually do a completely transparent, independent report of what happened at Milepost 5. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who did not sign up for public comment but would like to be heard? Again, we'll remind you it's a 3-minute maximum time limit on comments. If you would like to be heard, please raise your hand. Okay. We move on now to the report of the chair. I'm going to be brief. We're going to be hearing later in this meeting about legislative session outcomes. And if you've been following the news at all, I think you're aware that this has turned out to be a historic session. And I think with the kind of resources that have been committed, that we're going to see continued momentum on filling the great housing gap. Oh, and I also want to share a brief personal note. I will not be chairing the council meeting next month. I'm taking some vacation. Councilmember Lee has agreed to fill in for me, and I'm very appreciative of that. Now we move along to the report of the director, and Director Bell is not with us today, but ready to step up to the plate and pinch hit. Deputy Director Caleb Yand.
Thank you so much, Chair Hall, Housing Stability Council members. It's so good to be with you this morning in virtual community. It's to see your all faces. I will do my very best to try to fill the shoes of Executive Director Bell, as she has a well-deserved time out of the office today. So I'm going to spend most of my time kind of elaborating a little bit from an operational perspective on what Chair Hall teed up as far as historic investments from the legislature, with a really kind of a focus on what that means for both Housing Stability Council members, what that means for what you'll see, as well as for partners, community that is tuned in and listening into this call. Before I jump into that, I just want to just take a moment to appreciate the public comment. We are working as an agency to truly kind of see feedback as a gift. We're a public agency, we're accountable to stewardship of public funds and to our relationship. And we view accountability, if we are in right relationship, as that we can be counted on. And so I just, from the Milepost 5, Housing Oregon, the feedback we received, that's important for us. And I just wanted to take a moment acknowledge that as that informs how we do our work going forward. So like I said, I'm going to spend most of my time talking about kind of operations and operational excellence. This is going to be slightly more of an internally focused than the usual report of the director, but frankly, that's what you get when your deputy director is the one who is pinch hitting, as a key part of my job is very laser focused on the operations. And as Chair Hall mentioned, at the end of our time today, you'll hear from Assistant Director Sting on the 2023 legislative session results. I think most of you all have been engaged with us, so this narrative might sound familiar from prior biennia, right? Biggest growth budget in OHCS history. We've said that before, and I don't mean to minimize, and it is true again. Over $1 billion in growth investments, new investments through OHCS, 140 new staff positions received in our agency, which is for kind of proportionality, that's over a 30% increase in staff growth. It's exciting. It's a lot of work. It's intimidating. And I also, as part of that context, I want to flag a statistic that we shared during legislative session and budget hearings and other places, that in 21-23, the last biennium, the one we just finished, over half of the staff at OHCS started in that very biennia, right? So over half of our team members have started in the last 2 years, and that's going to skew even further with these positions that we just received. So that's why operations is so important. And there's kind of two primary reasons for that. One is the bar is high. We have to be able to create and communicate accurate implementation plans on these new investments. That we owe that to the public, we owe that to you, we owe that to our partners, we owe that to the people that we are aspiring to serve. And with so many new leaders at OHCS, it's gonna be challenging, because we don't have, a lot of us don't have experience navigating either OHCS processes or state of Oregon processes. So that's one reason. The other is we have to give expectations and liberty to new and existing staff to be able to live our values in the way that we implement these new investments. There are portions of these investments where the legislative intent is quick. Plus up what you've done before, get it out quick. But part of what we need to do is to say, okay, where is that direction clear, and where is it that we have the ability, and then require ourselves through our processes to ensure that our values show up in how we implement these new investments. So that's kind of why I wanted to focus a little bit of our time on my time here on the operations side of it. I'm gonna just spend a few more minutes. I want to just talk about kind of what we're doing, how we're doing it, and then what you all as council members can expect going forward. So we have a formal project supported by our project management office around operational excellence. And it has evolved over the last year, given priority shifts such as the emergency orders on homelessness and housing supply and other pieces. But there's three main goals that I want to share with the council. The first is around inform value-based planning. So we need to be able to internally forecast and coordinate timelines of work with enough accuracy that we could communicate realistic dates of program availability to external audiences, to you, to those who are listening, to organizations who are going to be accessing the funding that we will be administering. We have to be able to create accurate plans, and those plans need to align with OHCS standards of excellence with OHCS values that we regularly espouse. So that's goal one, is informed value-based planning. Second is coordination and prioritization. We are working to acculturate a system that requires our shared services team. So think procurement, HR, equity, diversity, inclusion, research team, the shared services team, and the program divisions need to have processes that require ongoing coordination so we can prioritize efforts, so we don't burn staff out, so we could take action when plans aren't coming to fruition the way we expected, and to adjust where needed and be able to communicate if that happens. And so goal one is informed planning, goal two is coordination and prioritization, and goal three is build off existing tools. We created a project management office in this current biennium to kind of have some infrastructure to build off of. And these tools need to be able to reduce essentially the guesses. What we have seen in this last biennium, just very candidly with new leaders, is myself, external partners, legislators, others are saying, hey, when will this be done? And are required to give a date when frankly, it's often a guess because they've never navigated processes. So the piece of this is to build off existing tools to be able to reduce the kind of the guesses of when ultimately funding will be available for partners. So if that's the what, I want to kind of explain how we're doing it. And this very much relates to what will ultimately show up for this council in the coming months. So the first thing we're doing as the how is we are working with legislative leadership, with executive branch leadership, with budget officers, the kind of the whole gamut, to really classify the new investments as either full implementation, which in our mind, and we've kind of defined on this, is giving us the ability and the autonomy to create implementation plans that live our values, or to classify the new investments as essentially plug and play or program updates, where it's really clear through statute, through budget report, through legislative intent, that, hey, the intention is for you to just do this exact thing. In some cases, organizations are named in statute or things of that nature. So just be really, really crisp on where do we have that authority and autonomy to make decisions, and where, frankly, do we not? And to be able to provide that visibility to you all across the board on those investments. We're doing that. We've been doing that. We expect to have that done by the end of this month. That's one piece of the how. Related to that is we are establishing processes around both of those. So for every new investment, we're creating what we're calling critical path pipelines, which will tie into this kind of improved dashboard. So we're going to have an internal agency-wide dashboard that has all of the new investments and all of the very high-level key dates for each one. When is it going to come to Housing Stability Council? When is a contract going to be executed? Those sorts of things. But then within each of those, we're going to have, and specifically for procurement, for administrative rules, for Housing Stability Council, and for hiring of staff, we're going to have these pipelines that back plan, where we're able to have the program leaders work with our support sections to say, okay, what is it going to take to get there? And is that realistic? So that way we are able to have that kind of improved planning. So that's the second of the how. The first is classify, the second is these pipelines. And the third is for those areas where we have the autonomy to be able to do it the way that we want to, where it's not the legislative intent is just to do this exact thing. We are establishing formal processes that we're calling OHCS standards of excellence. And that is intended so our teams, our support sections, our leadership can can have basically a filter, for lack of a better word, to ensure that our values are clearly stated, that we understand the implementation plans, and that they align with it. So we have established that we're going to have these standards of excellence around equity and racial justice. So again, you know, when will we, for instance, be able to fully use the REIT and take the time to do that? These standards of excellence around engagement, how we engage to make sure that it meets our values, around internal stuff like IT systems to make sure that we're using systems and not spreadsheets, reporting and research, accounting and fiscal, and then communications. So the intention there is, again, on those areas that we will bring to this council, hey, these are the items that we have ability to do kind of full implementation on. That allows us to make sure from a process perspective that our standards are known and are expected to be used in the implementation of that. So I know this is kind of wonky in the weeds, and I'm almost done, I promise. But from a process perspective, this is a key piece of what we're doing to make sure that we deliver this historic budget in a way that aligns with our values. So I'll finish by saying, you know, what does this mean for you all, for partners, public listening, what to expect going forward? I already said earlier, by the end of essentially this month, we'll have kind of begun to and hopefully finalize vetting what we have the authority to really take our time to thoughtfully implement, and what is that kind of you know, plug and play that is the legislative intent behind that. We then will run these through, and there's really two things that I want to highlight for the council. One is that those critical path pipelines, one of them is for Housing Stability Council. So our intention with this is to have a much more specific and detailed roadmap for the council on what is going to be coming through these new 2023 legislative investments, so we can forecast better with you all as far as what you know our work plan will be with you all. The second is that by the end of the summer, we'll have informed implementation plans for what's in our 2023 or 23-25 budget. So we could say kind of across the boards, here's when the public, here's when stakeholders can expect, you know, things like an RFP to be released or the NOFAs. So there's that forecasting kind of consistently across the board for everything we received on the key dates associated with implementing those programs. So again, I know that was a bit wonky, a bit internal, but I wanted to use this opportunity to share with you all how we're working to really kind of be precise and also be values-based in how we're implementing the investments that you'll be hearing about later. So with that, Chair Hall, I will yield the rest of the time, and unless there are questions from the council.
Okay, Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Good morning, Caleb and everyone else. Thank you for that detailed information. You know, I actually am a lover of some of the wonk, so not all of the wonk, but some of the wonk. So thank you for that. You know, we've been talking about this for a long time, and I see the intent in trying to be better, do better, so that we can deliver what we want to deliver, and I absolutely support it. One piece that I really want to raise up is, I know you were thinking about this, but I did not hear anything related to the statewide housing plan priority of racial justice and equity. And this is the moment that this organization is either going to show up in its values around racial justice and equity, or we're going to miss another opportunity and we're going to largely replicate ourselves in the way that we have replicated and are working, right? I'm not saying there's not work there. want to request that you all, as you provide us with the plans and the where we're going to go and the metrics, that there be a clear and absolutely visible racial justice and equity plan for the hiring processes, for the procedures, for the review processes that that you're talking about, of one review and and absolutely for what you bring back to the council. And unfortunately, none of us, my organization or any of us, are at a place where we can just count on that issue being addressed in our day-to-day world because of white supremacy culture and the environment that we live in. Thus, we actually have to be explicit. And we have to be overt. And so in every one of the areas that you talked with us about the work that's happening internal to the agency, I would very much like to see a racial justice and equity plan linked one to one. So if you're building the internal dashboard that talks about how fast do the contracts get on time, how fast were the payments made, I want to have a racial justice and equity component and measure to those pieces. And when we're talking about our policy pieces, et cetera, we're talking about the people we're hiring and the level into the organization that we're hiring those positions. Where are we hiring people of color? In the represented positions or executive leadership? All of those details matter. And you're right, this is a moment. And if we don't do this, I know we're going to miss it out. And you've got the right team there with Chelsea and the committee to do that. And I just urge you, and I'm going to continue to be asking those questions when you all come back. And I think you know that. So I just wanted to lift up, I appreciate the details. I appreciate the effort. And I am looking for explicit racial justice and equity work, measures, and accountability. Thank you.
I appreciate that, Councilmember Lee, and we expect that you expect that, and to continue to be pushed and make sure that we're showing up in that way.
Do we have any other council questions, comments, or feedback right now? Okay, hearing none, we will move on to the presentation from the homeownership division. And Director Giscombe, are you ready to tee up your staff and go through these presentations?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Take it away, please.
Good morning, Chair Hall, council members, and Deputy Director Yant. My name is Kiba Giscombe, pronouns he, him, his. I'm the Director for Home Ownership Division here at OHCS. It's an honor being here today to listen, learn, and gain understanding of all the members and residents that shared their concerns today. Now for home ownership, we're excited to talk about the recommendation of changes that will be presented by Ms. Jessica McKinnon. With no further delay, I introduce Jessica McKinnon, who will discuss those changes in more detail. Thank you again for your time.
Great, thank you, Keeble. Good morning, I'm Jessica McKinnon. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Senior Homeownership Development Program Analyst with the Homeownership Development Team. It's great to be here presenting to you today with hopefully a quick administrative request. I wanted to start with a brief explanation of what has led us here. Our first homeownership notice of funding availability was launched in 2018, and that first NOFA and every NOFA since then has listed for-profit developers and organizations as eligible for LIFT as long as their projects were otherwise eligible. We didn't have any for-profit organizations apply until our 2022 NOFA when we awarded funds to the first phase of the Woodhaven development. As that project moved forward with our team and through due diligence and legal sufficiency, we learned from the Department of Justice that for-profit organizations actually weren't eligible for LIFT. That citation is written here in ORS 456-270 Section 3, which defines an eligible covenant holder for affordable housing covenants. You can see a standard for-profit developer doesn't meet any of these definitions. Fortunately, the organization Woodhaven Community Housing LLC had been in the process of forming a nonprofit entity to play a role in their affordable housing developments. Thistle and Nest, though a new nonprofit, does meet the NOFA requirements to receive the award and hold the covenant. For that 2022 award, we had planned to change the entity at closing, but we found that managing that change through legal sufficiency has caused delays and extra burdens for our partner. In our discussion with DOJ to resolve this issue, we were advised that moving forward and to reduce those burdens, we should seek your approval on any awardee entity changes. So this request is for 6 awards requiring an entity change. More details about these projects can be found in your packet, but I'll also give a brief summary today. We're requesting a change for all 4 awards given to Woodhaven Community Housing, LLC. Their 2022 project is the one that prompted the realization that for-profit organizations weren't eligible. Unfortunately, we had already published the 2023 NOFA and begun receiving applications before learning this. So the organization submitted their 2023 applications under their for-profit entity. Woodhaven and Thistle and Nest's key developer has been working with us in different capacities since 2018 and understands our programs, and we're excited to work with her on these projects. These 4 Woodhaven developments will provide over 100 affordable units, almost half of which are in rural communities. The memo you received did have an error in describing the company structure, and I do apologize for that. The separation of entities actually has not been completely determined, but Thistle and Nest will be able to receive the award, own the land, and fill all roles required by the NOFA. We recommend that all projects awarded to Woodhaven Community Housing, LLC be transferred to Thistle and Nest. Murphy's Crossing is another for-profit developer who applied for the 2023 NOFA. They're a separate entity from Woodhaven, Thistle and Nest, and their general contractor Hive Development, but they did consult with that team to complete their site plans and NOFA application, and they will hire Hive Development as their own general contractor. Due to the issues with for-profit organizations, Thistle and Nest has agreed to serve as the awardee, landowner, and holder of the Affordability Covenant. This was another misunderstanding in your memo. Murphy's Crossing LLC will still serve as the developer and will be entering into a formal agreement with Thistle and Nest regarding the award, financing, and the developer fee. These 5 development projects will all be held to the same standard of their applications and requirements of the NOFA. While the entities being awarded have changed, the development team's site location and details, cultural responsibility and responsiveness, and affordability requirements will all be the same. And then our final request is for Wallowa Resources. This is an established nonprofit community organization that received a pre-development and capacity building grant to help them establish Working Homes LLC, a new affordable housing development nonprofit organization. They applied under their primary organization, but requested that the award be issued to their new organization, Working Homes. This is a simple administrative request to help them manage their finances and provide better documentation of expenditure. No project details will change. The award was always intended to support Working Homes. We're just bringing this request to you in an abundance of caution in order to avoid any further issues or delays. Do you have any questions?
Excuse me, Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Jessica. Can we hear a little bit about who Thistle and Nest are? And quite a number of the projects are using them, which sounds great. I just don't know anything about them. And have we done the due diligence with the development company to know that this is the right place for all of these projects to go all at once?
Yes, we have. So Thistle and Nest is run by Amy Warren, who's been a partner for a long time, and she has worked with other developments under other organizations. Thistle and Nest is a new nonprofit organization, and they do this will be their first, I guess this first project will be their first development project. They do have an experienced development team. None of their qualifications on the development team side would be changing. As far as the NOFA requirements go, Thistle and Nest does meet all of the requirements set forth in the NOFA, and there are no red flags there. We're working with the Department of Justice to ensure that they do meet all of those criteria and guidelines and can be a good steward of our Article 11Q bond funds.
Thank you. I mean, I absolutely understand that they meet the technical requirements because, of course, we couldn't fund them if they didn't. I'm asking in terms of our values and the statewide housing plan priorities. What do we know about a new emerging organization, particularly for racial justice and equity? Are they able to take on 5 projects as a new emerging agency? That's what I'm asking for, not, did you do your due diligence? I absolutely believe and understand that you and the staff did. I'm trying to understand, who is this organization? What have we done, given some of the challenges we've had with developer organizations? If and I'm sure this, the primary person is a wonderful person. It's not about the individuals, it's about the organization, and it's about the organization in relationship to our systems and our statewide housing plan. That's what I'm really asking about.
Thank you. I see Keeble, you have your hand up.
Hi, good morning. With my wealth of experience of 3 months being here, that was a great question, Council Member Lee. I would like to just share that we're also internally having those questions that we ask ourselves as well about that entity. And I believe that's one of the reasons why we're going through such a careful process with Department of Justice to make sure that we could find out ways that we could have some security, or if security is required, because of some of those questions that we also share, as well as the newness of that program or that entity, because it was created just to make sure that we could get that nonprofit piece be added to our program. So there is a lot of internal talk around that, and that's why we're having these difficult discussion with DOJ as well, to make sure that we could feel comfortable with this entity moving forward, especially with it having so many projects under their roof right now.
Thank you. That's helpful. Again, I'm nervous about this. I'm not sure that it makes sense to give 5 projects to a brand new emerging organization if we don't know, for instance, how they meet our MWESB goals. If we don't know, for instance, how they're approaching racial justice and equity. If we don't know whether or not they have the administrative capacity to handle all of these projects. I'm nervous about this. And I'm not sure it's ready to go from my perspective. I don't want to get in the way of process. I know one of the projects has been put on hold because of the legal challenges we've been facing. But I'm interested in hearing from other council members what your thoughts are this. I'm not sure this is ready for me, or I'm not ready for it. Maybe I'm not ready for it.
Council Member Lee and Stability Council, can I jump in here also to add, and certainly want to open up exactly the way Council Member Lee framed. I want to just say what I know on this piece, as I've been working with the homeownership team. I think Director Giscombe said it, but just to be really clear, Thistle and Nest was created because we had initially awarded a for-profit, and they can't have the money, right? So it is literally in order to continue the award that had previously been provided. So just to be really fully transparent about that. The other thing that what I believe to be the case, and our team can confirm this, is the essentially the plans and the requirements, and I'm not familiar with the detail. I haven't gone back and looked at, what did their application say? What did we require in that application when we awarded the original organization? But as it relates to MWESB contracting, as it relates to developer capacity, as it relates to outcomes, client outreach, those sorts of things, all of those things will remain completely as previously required for the new nonprofit. So in case that is helpful, I just wanted to be a little bit explicit on that.
I also wanted to respond a little about the racial equity question. Amy Warren was the founder of another CLT that has demonstrated capacity in reaching out to racially diverse communities and showing great impact in racial equity. In all of their applications, they also did speak to their racial equity plan and commit to serving equal or better to the populations of the communities that they were serving, to make sure that they were serving at least a proportionate population of underserved communities in those communities that they were serving.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Mena.
Thank you, Chair Hall. And I really appreciate Councilmember Lee's bringing up this issue. I honestly, when I first read the report, I made a whole bunch of assumptions, which was, I understand about the need to change completely, and I was ready to vote for it. But the assumption that I made was that and correct me if that's the correct assumption or not, but the initial applicants were still an integral part of this process. And that this new entity was mostly new in paper because of the for-profit problem there. And therefore that the original intent and everything else, all the players on our part, and I'm sorry, my dog is going a little crazy there, was still in place, then not.
Yes, that's accurate. The development team, all of the staff who would be devoted to making these projects, to developing the projects, all of that remains the same. This is just a different entity on paper.
Okay.
So just real quick follow-up. If that's the case, that the original applicants are still main participants in this process, I don't have a problem with the change. With the clear understanding that we definitely, in terms of Councilmember Lee's concerns, are equally shared in ensure that they are able to deliver on those promises.
Thank you. And regarding the capacity piece, we are actually looking into processes, updating our processes and our NOFA regarding capacity of our applicants. As we develop that, we're going to be seeking feedback and have all of those processes in place for our next NOFA. We do understand these concerns that have been brought up and appreciate them.
Okay, anybody else? Would someone like to make a motion or perhaps suggest another course of action? But let's see, there's the proposed motion on the screen.
I move to approve the motion.
Thank you. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Okay, could we have a roll call, please?
Thank you, Chair Hall. Councilmember Lee.
Shalom, can I ask a question? If for the purposes of quorum, if I abstain, does that wreck our quorum?
Correct.
Can you come back to me, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
Chair Hall.
I vote yes.
Councilmember Mena.
Yes.
Councilmember Rogers,
Yes.
Councilmember Lee.
I'm going to vote yes, with such an enormity of ambivalence, hesitation, and trust in the goodwill and intent of what's going on here. But my concerns remain the same, even with the clarification that had here. And I would have loved us to maybe done a phased in approach or been a little more creative with how we were working with an entity that it sounds like got put together solely to get around a rule. And I have questions about that as well. Not that I don't love that, but I have questions about the sniff test around that as well. So I will reluctantly vote yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Lee. Duly noted. Motion passes.
Okay, thank you, everybody. And we move on to affordable rental housing and 3 decision items here. And Director Natasha Detweiler-Dobby, are you and your team ready to present?
We sure are. Thank you, Chair Hall, council members, Deputy Director Yant. Nice to see you all this morning. And hope everybody is doing well. I wanted to, before we kick off, we have a few agenda items before us. I want to just echo appreciation for the public comments received this morning, and we'll be following up on all of them. Our monthly update on Milepost 5 is published on our Housing Stability Council website. I think I've also sent it directly to council members. And and just flag one piece in response to public comment is that the expressed concerns over the new lease language is new. And so we will be having our compliance team look into that to review. And regardless, OHCS does hold the owner responsible to comply with federal low-income housing tax credit regulations regarding applicant eligibility, regardless of any wording in the lease that may be potentially attempting to limit liability of the property manager. So the ownership is would and always be responsible, but we will be following up and we'll report back on how that has, at our next monthly update. Let's see, and then as Caleb was talking about, following extensive and really exciting legislative investment, we are pivoting toward implementation and planning around that implementation. For our affordable rental housing division, this will mean that we'll be using the next several months to engage with external stakeholders and Housing Stability Council to evolve our fund offerings and policy objectives to be able to ensure impact and alignment. We want to continue to expand our deliberate alignment with equity and racial justice values, and I anticipate that we are building into this plan the use of our racial equity assessment tool to inform those recommendations that we'll be bringing forward and getting feedback on and discussing with you all. Also in mind as wanting to make sure that as we program these future resources, we are increasing the ease of navigation for users of our resources and processes, including pipeline management and support for applicants, focusing on expediting development into community to address the need across the state and to work to strive to meet the executive order around the needed housing production across the state. And that we want to make sure that we are responsive and able to support innovation and new ideas that could potentially make for long-term big impacts. And I think with that, I'm going to kick off our agenda item with Ed presenting our manufactured park preservation investment. I do have a lift update to provide, but I think I'll do that on the top end of that agenda item so it connects later, connect those dots more directly. So first up here is Ed, and I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you, Natasha. Give me just a moment while I share my screen. Hopefully we can get this going here. All right, here we are. Okay. Good morning, Housing Stability Council, Chair Hall and Director Yant. I am Edward Brown, a program analyst with the Affordable Rental Housing Division. I'm joined here by Lauren Dressen from our Disaster Recovery and Resiliency section as a backup resource for any council questions later, because we do have multiple sections engaged in this project. I'm here to bring a motion before the council on a grant funding request. This request is for Royal Oaks Mobile Manor. The owner of the park is Housing Authority of Jackson County. They will own and operate the park as affordable for the next 60 years to families who are 80% AMI or lower. This project is located in the south end of Medford, just outside of Phoenix. The requested motion is for $11,355,917 of the General Housing Account funds through the Preservation of Manufactured Dwelling Parks program. A little background about this project. This park was burned to the ground by the 2020 Alameda wildfire. The Housing Authority was awarded $6 million directly funded through the legislature to help acquire the park quickly. Restoration of the park has begun with funding through DRR's wildfire relief funds. At this time, much of the project's construction is nearing completion. The Preservation of Manufactured Dwelling Park grant funding from today's motion is intended to help complete construction of the infrastructure and to swap or reimburse most of the bridge loan and grant funds through DRR provided for the infrastructure replacement costs that DRR has helped the park begin with. This in turn will result in the return of DRR emergency wildfire funds where they can be repurposed to additional wildfire relief projects. The portion of this project that consists of the construction and placement of new modular homes is being conducted through DRR here at OHCS, which is why Lauren is here in case the council has any questions that may touch on the wider scope of this project. But I want to be clear in explaining to the council that today's funding request does not involve those new modular homes. None of this program funding can or will be spent on the modular homes that are intended for the project, but they are a part of the larger scope of the project whole. The Preservation of Manufactured Dwelling Parks funds are specifically intended for acquisition and infrastructure expenses only. Displayed here is the ERJ information about the project sponsor. The project's intention is to rehome as many of the original park residents as possible. It's not yet known who among the original park residents are returning to Royal Oaks, but the Housing Authority is actively engaged in that outreach. Many have moved on since 2020 and are not going to return. The park was destroyed by the wildfire in 2020, so there are no demographics to report today. In terms of repopulating the park, those opting to return will be given first priority. The next priority will be for other wildfire survivors of the Alameda fire. The Housing Authority has engaged with Jackson County's Community Action Agency Access and will engage with culturally specific agencies, including Northwest Seasonal Workers Association and Coalición Fortaleza, to engage equitable access to available housing units. If the council has any questions, comments, or concerns, I'd be happy to address any of those at this time before the motion.
Any council discussion? Yes, Councilmember Lee.
I'll defer to Councilmember Rogers and go after.
Okay.
Hi, I just wanted some clarification about possible outreach for those individuals that have been displaced. I know you said that many of them would not be returning, but just a concern about those residents being housed and or how are you going to seek out new residents?
So the Housing Authority of Jackson County has the list of initial or prior residents of the park. And so they're able to contact them and essentially ask if they want the option to move back into the park. The project overall is replacing all of the old manufactured housing with new modular homes. And so there will be a place for them to move into. And I can tell you that, again, in the larger scope of the project, the original tenants that are opting to return to the park, those homes will be gifted to those tenants. And so that'll actually still be a home ownership model for this park, even though it's still owned and operated by the housing authority.
Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Thanks, Ed, for the overview. And I'm just, I have a question and a comment. The question is, am I correct in understanding that the struggle and the challenges for the manufactured dwellings themselves do not touch the motion in front of us? This is about infrastructure. The ongoing work around that issue is going to keep going parallel to this. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes. The motion today, the funding that we're asking for approval today is solely for the repair and replacement of infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. So assuming that in the unlikely event we don't get satisfaction on the actual dwellings themselves, is the resource that we are about to build into the infrastructure able to be transferred to a new manufacturer of the homes?
I'm not sure I understood the question exactly. I want to be sure. Are you asking
if we're not able to get the dwellings that we're anticipating to get in the condition and manner we want, and have to then go look for a different partner to work with, can the access to the infrastructure improvements that we're about to make here be transferred to whoever that new provider is?
I think, and I'm wondering if I might be able to help answer. I think so it's the housing authority is taking ownership of the park and doing that. And so they are using third parties to find units to place. And so, Caleb, you might need to step in with the details on that side of the kind of that units piece component. But if whatever is currently in the works does not work to put those units on site, they would be the housing authority would be able to find, put another something on those. Like the infrastructure is needed regardless, and the infrastructure is needed to serve any future housing put on those sites to serve the households.
Perfect. That is exactly what I was asking.
Okay, yes.
And I'm sure I wasn't clear.
I agree. Yes.
No, it's complicated. I think that is incredibly true in all of these, but especially here. Yes.
We do a project that isn't complicated? I don't know. My second comment is, can we go back to the slide about the equity and racial justice assessment, which I know we're testing out different versions of this, and this is an early prototype, so we're not expecting perfection, if we ever expect that. I like this. I like, because I can see things specifically. I appreciate that. I appreciate that we've identified the different areas in which racial justice and equity might manifest itself. And in terms of the specific information about this project, I look and see that it appears there is not one Black, Indigenous, or person of color anywhere in this project. I'm just noticing that and raising that for us. So part of what happens, and I'm so sorry, Natasha, that, once we start to see the level of detail and information, it causes more questions, and it causes us to reflect on, well, what do we do about that? Even as there are different challenges based geography and all those kinds of stuff. Once we have the information, we can't not see it. And I think we can't not respond to it. I'm not asking for any response now. I'm simply saying, I like where we're going with this. I know it's a work in progress, and looking at the information we have to date is still concerning to me about that, and curious then where and how we're going to go once we have this kind of information. So thank you for it. And of course, it just raises more questions for me. I wonder about, as we look at the process, so Ed, you were talking about some, and we often hear people say, oh, I'm going to contact this organization in my community or that organization in the community. And in the past, we've talked about, do we have subcontracts that we can see? Is actual money and resources going to the smaller nonprofits that people are using to apply for these funds? And do we see any benefit to these organizations, not simply the constituencies that they serve? We have oftentimes had people come and present to us on why a project is, why they're working on the project. I wonder if there couldn't be some kind of statement of racial justice and equity from any of the organizations, Conexiones or the coalition, anyone who is identified in a project, to come and say, yeah, I'm working on this project and I support it. It's one thing for the mainstream organization to say, I'm working with the communities of color. It's another thing for the communities of color to come back and say, yeah, I'm working with this mainstream organization and you should support them. So I just offer that as a suggestion as we continue to work on this. Thanks.
Absolutely. Councilmember Lee, and I'm going to try to not respond to all of it, but I also can't not say, I think that part of why providing this clear, transparent information, just facts about these things is so important, in that we are, because how else do we get to a place where we see it all and you get to see where things are? And I also, I think we're walking lines in terms of wanting to make sure that resources get to those that are supporting and being responsive to community and equity and racial justice values, and not provide it overburdening. And I know that we've implemented over time as many different factors of, are you putting resources to those organizations and other? And so I think it all gets very different in every community. And I think it continues to be really important, as we've seen it, to just present the facts, not to say this is a convincing fact that we've gotten it 100%, but that we are not going to not look at the data because we don't want to be aware of what it's saying.
All right, Councilmember Rogers.
Hi, just to piggyback off of Councilmember Lee's assessment of this, can someone help walk me through how, if we keep saying, no, 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 how this meets, it says this project meets the funding framework criteria adopted by the Housing Stability Council.
Yeah, so they have, the requirements here are that they are responsive. So they have a diversity, equity, inclusion agreement in place. They are doing affirmative marketing. They are doing MWSB. They're reporting tenant demographics and really building all of that in. But that does not mean that we have as a requirement for all development that they are led by BIPOC or that they are culturally specific partnerships. And so I think we are trying to incentivize and move our market to expand investments in culturally specific and culturally responsive work. And that does not mean right now that every development group is, they are all affirming commitments to and are working to, are finding ways in their project design and execution to prioritize and center outreach and inclusion. But that does not mean that right now we have achieved the end game, which would be better representation across all of these organizations.
Okay, and as far as the marketing included on the slide, how is that marketing different from affirmative fair housing marketing?
So I think as a base, as a bottom of the low bar expectation is you at the very least need to do affirmative fair housing marketing. So prioritizing outreach to those least likely to apply, those that have not been centered or prioritized for access to affordable housing in communities. But then all of our, and so in addition to that, kind of having the list of populations that need to have translated for or what have you in that engagement and outreach, we are also encourage organizations to be culturally responsive themselves and partner with other groups and organizations to do that outreach. And I think Ed named several different organizations that the Housing Authority in this situation is partnering with to do that outreach as they are trying to repopulate this park once there are units available.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else on the council at this time? All right, then. Are we ready for a motion? And
so moved.
Okay. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Thank you. Could we have a roll call, please?
Thank you, Chair Hall. Chair Hall.
Yes.
Councilmember Lee.
Yes.
Councilmember Mena.
Yes.
Councilmember Rogers.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
All right. On to the next item.
Thank you all.
Great. Thank you so much. And so presenting the next item is Michael Parkhurst, our Preservation Program Manager. And this is as he will is in the packet, and as he'll be discussing, is a update from a prior presentation and correction to bring another project into recommendation here.
Thank you, Natasha. Chair Hall, Deputy Director Yant, members of the council. My name is Michael Parkhurst. I'm the Preservation Program Manager in Affordable Rental Housing. And we're bringing one more project to you pursuant to the 2022 Preservation NOFA. The NOFA, as you'll remember, was released last September and closed in January 2023. After we brought 4 projects to you for approval in April, an applicant that was unsuccessful at the time raised some questions with us about scoring, and we discovered that we had in fact missed something we had agreed to score differently, and Home Forward's application for this project, Peaceful Villa, should have been the highest scoring project in the urban category. We went back to preservation resources that we could find and have put together this recommendation to fund the project and help Home Forward proceed with it. So this includes about $8.8 million in preservation funds, $10 million in GHAP, and $30 million of Oregon Affordable Housing Tax Credits. This is a redevelopment project. It's an existing 70-unit project in Southeast Portland that will be basically completely redeveloped as 166 new projects under HUD's Rental Assistance Demonstration, or RAD program. Home Forward has a lot of experience and familiarity with the RAD process, and this will convert what is now public housing to part of Home Forward's affordable portfolio with project-based vouchers. And I want to point out that this will increase the number of project-based vouchers on this site by some 96 new vouchers. The demographics here, they expect actually to change as the project redevelops. Right now, it's about as diverse as the surrounding neighborhood. They're working closely with IRCO to really prioritize immigrants and refugees, and expect the new redeveloped project, including all the folks that come back who live there now, to be roughly half BIPOC when they're finished. The average income here right now is about 16% of AMI, so they're serving a very low income population currently, and about half of the residents are 60 or older, and about 2/3 of them experience disabilities. As with every project recommended for funding, Peaceful Villa meets or exceeds the agency's expectations around equity and racial justice. And with that, I will welcome any questions you might have and refer you to the motion on page 12.
Questions from the council? Councilmember Mena. You're up.
Thank you, Chair Hall. A quick question. Completely understand and I'm good with the proposal. Due to that mistake, were any other applications evaluated just in case there was another mistake made in any of the other applications that were denied? Was that contemplated?
Councilmember Mena, I'm happy to answer that question. We actually had another protest come in. So we reviewed several projects for scoring on relatively small matters. This was an unusual technical issue with redevelopment projects and the way we scored those under the NOFA. And there were only 2 projects proposed for redevelopment. The other was Clara Vista, which we also funded in April. So both of the redevelopment projects that would have been subject to this Home Forward issue, we now would propose to fund. So if we fund Home Forward, both the redevelopment projects would be funded.
And I will just add to that, Michael, in that score, following the recommendations that we bring forward, the team debriefs with everybody, usually just those that aren't successful, although sometimes those that are want to have a debrief as well, and we'll do that. But then any feedback, any scoring protests that come forward are deliberately walked through, responded to, and if it is shown that we scored them this way and there's a reasonable argument that we could have looked at that differently, we apply that to all projects. So give the benefit of that to all projects. And then look back. So as we reflected back after all of that information is incorporated, are bringing this one project as the funding recommendation that would have been different. So the rest of those scoring updates and protests are taken seriously, and this was the only change in project that we would have brought to you, and so that's why you're seeing this one. I think the scoring is always hard. Preservation is incredibly tricky and nuanced, and I think the work that Michael has done to build the preservation framework since the time this prior preservation NOFA was launched is going to pay dividends moving forward. My fingers are crossed there, but I think in terms of just like clarifying, like deciding what we need to have in terms of priorities there, because there are just so many needs. The need is vast. The impact of not preserving projects is incredible. And so really having that thoughtful strategy in place is going to help these types of issues and concerns moving forward. But again, in terms of the scoring piece itself, all feedback and concerns over scores have been addressed, and this is the one project that would have been different.
Yeah, just to finalize my point on this is, Home Forward is a very sophisticated developer and very keen on scoring and the process. And equate this thought process for me, this thought process that I'm having to, a tenant applying for a unit in an application. If they know they can go back and say, hey, wait a minute, we got a problem here, they're more likely to be able to be successful, whereas those that don't know, they don't even say anything and just continue and they try next time. So it's more from that perspective than anything else. So thank you.
Absolutely. And I think that that concern around everyone having same information and understanding of where they can push is a large driver for why we want to make sure that any feedback received is then applied to everybody. So it's not just prioritizing those that had the time, effort, and resources to make that follow-up request, but that if it did benefit some other applicant in that pool. And also why I think as we put resources out and have established rules around them, why changing them later on, that where someone might have chosen to not apply because of the way that read or the way that was, that we are not changing our story after the door has closed. And I think that is, it's a huge place for me, at least, of having trust and confidence in our process and our ability for folks to access.
Oop. All right. Councilmember Rogers, did you have another
Yes.
question? Go ahead, please.
So I appreciate that you did go back and look at all of the other scores to make sure that it was equitably applied. But my question is, how are you communicating that back to the applicant? So did you contact everyone to let them know that, you know, we had a change in scoring, or how does that work?
Councilmember Rogers, as Natasha was just saying, we did circle back for feedback with virtually every applicant, and certainly the ones that formally protested, we gave them a formal response that walked through every point that they raised and showed them where they came out in the revised scoring. So we have really tried to be very transparent with folks that way. And we stay in relationship with folks too. I think almost everybody that was unsuccessful this time we'll be talking to about future preservation needs again, and try and be clearer about our priorities and help people match up their projects with our priorities.
Thanks.
All right, anything else from council members? All right, then are we ready for the motion, which is on page 12 of the meeting packet?
So moved.
Is there a second, please?
Second.
Thank you. Could we have a roll call now, please?
Thank you, Chair Hall. Chair Hall.
Yes.
Councilmember Lee.
Yes.
Councilmember Mena.
Yes.
Councilmember Rogers.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
All right, thanks, everybody. And we're on to the last item, Lift Rental NOFA project recommendations.
Great. Thank you, Chair Hall. And so we have Becky Isom here to present the Lift Rental NOFA recommendations, which is very exciting. I think before we dig into all of these incredible projects, I do, let's see, there's probably a few things to queue up. One is we did hear some public comment this morning from Housing Oregon around the scoring and process for LIFT, in particular, the representation of culturally specific organizations in this list of fund recommendations. And this is a program that has been deliberately trying to build in scoring and incentives to center resources to culturally specific partners, and real true engagement around equity and racial justice. I don't, I think it needs to continue to evolve. We need to really rebuild, build the system so that there is our lanes of access. I think an exciting piece of all of this is that we have a tremendous amount of lift investment moving forward into this next biennia. And so as we program these resources moving forward, we'll be able to do a lot in terms of building access and opportunity and standards here to essentially align objectives. And as I talked about earlier, in our funding process updates broadly, really wanting to accomplish creating and updating our systems to be responsive to market conditions and foster development where it is ready to go. And so we will be engaging, of course, with Housing Oregon as well as other stakeholders as we build and assess those criteria. We are always looking to other states and jurisdictions for inspiration and best practices. So take that feedback in earnest, and we'll be moving forward. And none of that means that there is any regret here about these recommendations. These are incredible projects, and we'll be excited in the future, hopefully, to have more opportunity to fund more of them. I think another piece that I wanted to flag is kind of a follow-up on the equity racial justice profiles for projects that we have begun kind of testing out. I did send because we had not created those when we issued this NOFA, it was not part of our application process to have that information in hand. So it was only after we notified projects at the end of last week that we were able to say, and now can you fill this out for us? Wanting to make sure that we have clear, consistent information across all of the projects. So Becky has done that work with the teams. I did send you all a copy of those for all of the projects. If it hasn't already been posted to our council webpage, it will be shortly. And again, this is a place where we just we want to keep our eyes open and kind of see what starts to be levers for different impact and change. I think one last piece, obviously, that I do want to also review here is the status of LIFT. This is for those that have been tracking it. We've in late March had some updates to our legal documents implemented that kind of put a pause to being able to execute these funds into projects. I am really excited to be able to report that a project has closed with updated documents in place. Our Department of Justice, our bond counsel, our state bond counsel, and all of our project lenders have been working pretty darn tirelessly to make sure that we can be balancing needs and interests here to have a viable program to continue the huge impact that LIFT has had across the state. And the concepts are, I don't even know, Councilmember Lee, if I would just call them wonky, I would call them in the weeds here. The biggest points of contention really around what happens in the case of a financial foreclosure, which is, I always try to keep perspective, something that we always want to avoid happening. So, it's like planning for the worst case scenario. And I think at this point, generally and broadly, that there has been, identified agreement. I'm hearing clear alignment from lenders and as well as the state, obviously, in terms of the idea that long-term affordability is what we want to get through these investments. And so there is not an expressed interest from lenders to eliminate affordability, once in a case of financial foreclosure, and the details matter. And so all of that is the case. Again, we've gotten to a place where we've balanced it well enough to get one transaction across the finish line. Really optimistic that there'll be a few more cascading events in the really near term. I'm working right now, not multitasking, but I'm working right now with to get a technical advisory out with an updated status for everyone around some of these key factors, as well as updated draft documents. And we'll be working to schedule, an update webinar for all who want to dig in on those details with us. And so I'm hoping that advisory is able to get out today. I'm just needing make sure that my words are correct in all of that. But I, again, feel like we're in a place where I have comfort and confidence bringing forward these new, this new cohort of LIFT projects, knowing that they will need to use updated documents, and that is the world before us. And so I think that was all that I had in mind to chat about right now, but happy for any questions or conversation about any of those.
Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Thank you so much, Natasha. I really appreciate sort of context, background, and information setting before we get into the projects themselves. Super helpful. I was trying to get in before we got to the next and the next. The feedback that we've gotten from the housing community around racial justice and equity is compelling to me. And I understand that we have gone way down this path with the projects that we have in front of us, and they are what they are, and they did what we did. However, I noticed, Natasha, even as you reference what's coming now into the next biennium and what's going to be available for LIFT in the next biennium, I would like to request that before we start to move that money into an announcement or a NOFA or any, open and release, that we do some of the due diligence on the ideas that were shared with the public testimony, both in written and in verbal this morning, and come back with some kind of information that can be shared with the council and with our community about, if we're going to look at some best practice in another state, if we've looked at, what are the unintended consequences of some of these policies before we start with the next bucket of funds in the new biennium. So if we could have that before we started on the next procurement process for the new funds, that would be lovely. Thank you.
Absolutely appreciate it. And you will see quite a bit of that. So I'm excited to be able to engage with you all. Any other questions? Okay, sorry, Chair Hall.
Yeah, that's fine. I was just going to ask if there are any other questions or feedback from the council. Well, hearing none, I guess we're ready for a motion if somebody would care to make it.
Well, I think we, Becky is gonna yet still walk through the recommendations in front of you. I talked for too long, I think.
Okay.
It sounded just like a presentation, but here's Becky and these great projects.
Good morning, Deputy Director Yant, Chair Hall, and council members. For the record, my name is Becky Isom, Senior LIFT Program Analyst from the ARH Development Resources and Production Section. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm here today to recommend 10 projects for funding approval for the LIFT 2023 Rental NOFA round. This year, we had a total funding offering of $106,915,880. That was split between two funding paths, one that could be leveraged with our 4% low-income housing tax credits, or LIHTC, and private activity bonds, aka PAB, and the other for projects that weren't going to leverage LIHTC or PAB resources. The LIFT with the 4% LIHTC PAB did not include a pathway for projects in the Portland metro counties to apply, as OHCS and the metro regional government had previously entered into a sub-allocation agreement in order to free up additional PAB resources for the next 2 years. Those projects were previously approved by Housing Stability Council earlier in 2023. As a note, the Portland metro counties were designated as Multnomah, Washington, and Clackamas counties, and included the rural portions of those counties as well. 55% of our available LIFT funds were allocated to the LIFT-only funding pathway to encourage smaller projects that wouldn't need to leverage LIHTC and PAB resources. With OHCS offering over $53 million of funding in LIFT only, it was unexpectedly undersubscribed, with 6 applications requesting in total a little over $29 million. This included an opportunity for small projects in the Portland metro counties to apply for LIFT funds for projects that didn't need to leverage the PAB resources. As you can see, most of the funding dollars requested from this funding path was requested by projects in the Portland metro counties. Staff is currently recommending 4 of the 6 projects that were submitted through the LIFT-only pathway. And as has happened for the last few years, the LIFT with 4% LIHTC and PAB pathway was massively oversubscribed, with 17 applications requesting over $199 million in LIFT funds. The projects were almost evenly split across rural and urban regions and included 4 wildlife recovery projects in Jackson County. 2 of the projects did not meet threshold requirements and were not scored, and staff is recommending funding for 6 of the proposals submitted through this NOFA offering. You may have noticed that we have an even split of projects across rural and urban communities this year, 5 and 5. Of the 5 rural projects that are being recommended, 3 of them received points for being in a wildfire recovery area. Yay! The Depot Bay townhomes are also a wildlife recovery project with a previous OHCS disaster recovery and resiliency grant, but they did not receive wildfire bonus points as it is outside of the ARH focused recovery zones. We're looking at, the actual census tracts and cities that lost units. That's what we're doing there. This is the 3rd LIFT NOFA that has included bonus points for being in the cities or census tracts that lost housing during the 2020 Labor Day wildfires. The 5 urban projects that are being recommended include Lyft's Rentals' first project in Bend. We've had so much home ownership that this is just amazing that we get to do Bend for our first time. These projects will bring much needed rental housing to 5 of our urban centers across the state. So going into the policy analysis bit of this, Lyft is required to serve underserved communities in Oregon, which has been defined by the legislature as rural Oregon and communities of color. Council has been a guiding light in our efforts to bring all of our stakeholders to the table. And part of this has been acknowledging that our culturally specific organizations have greater funding needs than our more established for-profit partners. For the 2022 Lyft NOFA, Council and our CSO stakeholder group endorsed a culturally specific organization set aside to provide a funding pathway that would allow higher subsidy requests for these sponsors. This year, instead of the set aside, the NOFA gave points for having a qualified culturally specific organization, or a QCSO, in the development team. I'm going to talk about the successes from this change on the next slide, but we have found that there is a need to balance the additional points for QCSOs with our other scoring criteria, like subsidy limits. We hope to work with our partners to right-size our scoring in the next Lyft, before our next Lyft offering. As I've mentioned previously in my presentation, we have an ongoing private activity bond constraint. We are currently exploring ways to combine resources that will continue to take the pressure off of our constrained PAB resources. Now, for this NOFA, when the decision was made to sub-allocate funds to the Metro Regional Government, the 2 new set-asides that we created in 2022 for our mid-sized urban centers and our culturally specific centers, they were placed on hold. Instead, we reallocated points from our readiness to proceed category to a qualified culturally specific organization, or QCSO, category that would give points to a project depending on how the QCSO was involved in the development team. 6 projects applied with a QCSO as part of their development team structure, with 5 organizations signing co-developer agreements with various for-profit developers. Of the 4 QCSOs on projects being recommended for funding, 3 of them have been working with affordable housing developers and management agent companies to provide culturally specific resident services for tenants for several years. The 4th is a religious organization with a long history of serving and working with the local unhoused population in their city, including providing temporary housing arrangements. I am happy to respond to any questions that council may have, and I otherwise ask that you consider the motion on page 19 of your packet.
All right, council, questions, comments? Then I would like to encourage somebody to make the motion. Oh, Councilmember Lee, did you have something before we voted?
Yes, I do have.
Okay, go ahead.
Question. I'm just trying to leave space for my colleagues. Thank you for the information and for the work to get these recommendations to us. I want us to spend a little more time about the impact of the decision of a set aside versus points versus readiness to proceed versus the state of the community of culturally specific developers, et cetera, et cetera. These are a number of the considerations that I think we have to take into account. I'm still not clear, Becky, from the analysis that you did we do better in terms of our racial justice and equity values when we went from a set aside to a point system, or not, right? And I'm curious about this balancing of readiness to proceed with low cost units, like the lowest cost units get the bigger points, and points for racial justice and equity. I'm not sure those all balance out for me. And this idea of readiness to proceed for the lowest cost is one that absolutely privileges for-profit large developers. And so our continued use of that, even as we test and experiment with Is it set aside? Is it points? Is it set aside plus points maybe in the future, right? That's still not clear to me. It does not impact for me on these recommendations and awards. So I want to be clear about that. However, it's always helpful when we're looking at specifics, the questions get raised, and I think this is another set of things to talk about before we go into the next bucket of LIFT funds. Thank you.
So thank you so much for that question, Mary. I'm actually very, very, very proud of how we actually brought so many culturally specific organizations that have already been working on our projects into a co-developer, which is a co-applicant. Somebody used the term junior partner. These are not junior partners. These are co-developers. They are getting a portion of that developer fee. They are getting the training for how to help their own stakeholders and the people they serve navigate the very complicated lease-up requirements that we have for affordable housing. So just the fact that we've now brought three resident service providers that have all been working boots on the ground in these units, in these projects for a number of years, where they're finally having the opportunity to be recognized for what they're actually contributing to their projects.
Mm-hmm.
So
I very much appreciate that. And resident services is almost always where we see the communities of color oofed off to, right? And
yes.
We're simply paying them for the services that they would naturally be delivering to their community members. So in that case, I don't think it's improving the status systemically, right? Not by individuals, but systemically, because where the money is, where the resources are, is at the development level. So we've got more work to do. This is not a criticism of what you've just shared. It's acknowledgement that yes, this is great progress, and we got to go up and up and up, because we're not at the place, do we have co-development relationships when we have a new mainstream developer? No, we just let them compete, and we score them when we rank them, right? It would be lovely, Natasha, as we sort of move forward with our own education, to hear some of the conversations I know you've been having with communities of color and development organizations to understand, is this progress for them? Does this move the work forward, or are they doing it because they understand that they must in order to be able to be included in some of these projects? Yeah. So that's
absolutely, I appreciate the feedback, and and we'll be using it as a foundation component for our next steps here. And again, and not all progress is final, and yeah. I think that is seeing every action has consequences, and and sometimes it hits it well and sometimes it doesn't. I think to acknowledge the kind of cascading event that Becky did reference, which is we were dealing with, over this past 2 years, a incredibly volatile market, and made a strategic decision to do a sub-allocation to Metro in order to facilitate the ability to move forward with a really important group of projects. And that was not initially concepted, and so it did end up deteriorating some of those other strategies, right? You took that whole resource bucket out, and you can't then divide the rest of it and still achieve what you might have initially wanted to do. And so I think that is also a great lesson for us to be reflecting on as we put into place the next 2 years of resources and frameworks and kind of alignments and clear objectives, where we are dedicating resources to do something in particular, that we need to be understanding that when if there is a future change around that there will be these implications to it that will end up kind of rebalancing in a way that might not have been anticipated at the time. But
sure,
across the board, really incredible, helpful feedback, and we'll be using and building on that with certainty as we move forward.
Wonderful. I have one more question, Chair Hall. I noticed in the presentation that there were a number of projects in rural areas that either weren't complete or sufficient or whatever the assessment was. We all know how hard we've been working to make sure that resources are going into the rural areas, not just in terms of parity of number of projects, but also amount of resource. I'm wondering, and you don't need to answer it now if it's a long answer, I'm wondering about our follow-up with some of those white starred projects on the maps that you showed us to say, look, it wasn't this year, and when we get in our new pot, here's the things you could do. You know, I know you always offer technical assistance, but I'm wondering if there's anything structural, again, coming back to this structural piece, if there's anything structural we could be doing to learn from those, significant numbers of rural focused projects that weren't able to be competitive. And I will just say by way of closure, I appreciate that we are able to have a conversation that is now moving us to structural and programmatic practices that isn't focused on this project or that project or, this project over here. Yes, you all have done the due diligence, and I feel like it's better for us as a council when we can see that work, understand it, but then come to a systemic and structural conversation or a practices conversation. That to me is, I think, fulfilling our greatest purpose as a council. So I just want to thank you all in the team and appreciate that.
Absolutely. And I am so excited to say, let's talk structural response here, because I think part of what our ongoing engagement with Housing Stability Council, communities across the state struggling to figure out how to navigate and how to get the housing that they need into community. We've started seeding many different pieces of work around that, and what we really need to be able to do is really, hold and provide deliberate project-specific technical assistance and feedback to projects. And so one of the structural pieces that we will be working to implement, and we're able to have staffing added into our affordable rental housing group, will be an externally facing technical advisor role that is really specifically dedicated to do that type of work and do more of the proactive pipeline management when you have an early project, to be able to give it the feedback and the navigation assistance, as well as potentially, how can we build in pre-development resources or capacity resources to really support that work in a way that will make sure that they're successful when they're ready to come in for final funding. And so I think that is a place of real structural change, where there's a lot of more conversations around that, but that we are really keyed in a position right now to be able to do that structural change and add that role, which is, I find, incredibly exciting. And I think it's something that has, we've multitasked our way through it and put a lot of burden on folks that have a huge stack on their desks, and that having kind of freeing up a role to really actively engage in that again is, again, I think really hoping that that is going to make, we're not only building this pipeline, but making sure that efforts put forward to get resources don't fall short for lack of understanding. And I think, and all of that, and, in a balance of all of the, wanting to make sure that organizations are well funded and sustainable and all of that. So there's a balance to all of it, but that we really do have the opportunity to put that structural response in. So we're kind of institutionalizing our responsiveness and engagement with project development teams.
Okay. Anything else from the council at this point? All right, are we ready for the motion now?
So moved.
Thank you. And a second, please.
Second.
Okay, can we have the roll call now, please?
Thank you, Chair Hall. Chair Hall.
Yes.
Councilmember Lee.
Yes.
Councilmember Mena.
Congratulations. Yes, great job.
Councilmember Rogers?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Council.
So that brings us to the conclusion of the Affordable Rental Housing Division portion of our agenda. So although it's almost half an hour early, we will take our 15-minute break right now and look to reconvene at 11:16 or thereabouts. So see you then. Thank you. Hope it's a great one. And hello again, everyone. We are wrapping up our break, and as soon as we have all the council members back on the call, we'll resume. Still to come, presentations from the Housing Stabilization Division and the Government Affairs Division. Okay, how are we doing on getting the council back on board?
All present and accounted for. I think Mary Lee had to step away.
Okay. So let's reconvene then. It is now 17 minutes after 11 in the morning, and this is the continuation of the Oregon Housing Stability Council. And we're ready now to hear from the Housing Stabilization Division, and I will hand things off to the director of that division, Jill Smith.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Chair Hall, council members, and Assistant Director Yant. I'm Jill Smith, Director of Housing Stabilization, and I use she, her pronouns. And this morning, I have the pleasure of introducing you to Michelle Cole, our new Assistant Director of the Energy Services Section. She and Dan Elliott, Senior Policy Analyst, who we all know and love, are here to share two presentations with you on our new Weatherization Training Center. It's an opportunity we're very excited about, as well as the Oregon Multifamily Energy Program, or MAP. There is no action being requested of the council this morning. These presentations are informational only. And with that, I'll turn the time over to Michelle and Dan.
Good morning. It is a pleasure. Good morning, Chair Hall and council members and Deputy Director Caleb Yant. For the record, my name is Michelle Cole. My position is Assistant Director of Energy Services, and my pronouns are she and her. Thank you for taking the time to hear the important updates within the Energy Services team and regarding our new training center and the ORMAT program. The Weatherization Training Center will increase and enhance the skills and contractors across the state of Oregon to meet the demands and production of energy technology, building science, renewables, and energy efficient program improvements in support of the following programs. With USDO and Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act in 2021, the House Bill 3141, public purpose funding increased 60% annually, and Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. The Weatherization Training Center is actually located on 2475 Pringle Road in Southeast Salem, not too far from our main office. This location will entire our OHCS weatherization department on the office side of the building, as well as the operate as the program's state training center throughout collaboration with CAPO and the Oregon Training Institute. The lease is set for 5 years with the possibility of extension up to 10 years. The space gives us ample opportunity to stand up a training facility that is modern and cutting edge, with plans to bring a single wide mobile home into the warehouse to provide hands-on learning on the house type that covers nearly 60% of our low-income housing stock completions in Oregon. It will work in collaboration with several other partners within the industry of energy and weatherization and trained workforce development, and create pathways to careers in home performance, energy efficiency, and renewable energy sectors by hiring and retaining professionals. We will also be partnering with the Oregon Training Institute and Community Action Partnerships of Oregon to expand training migrant farm workers and BIPOC partners and local community action agencies services in areas to allow network to expand the workforce and increase weatherization, provider network capacity, and further diversity weatherization, and provide auditors and inspectors through the $1.7 million U.S. Department of Energy Workforce Development Grant and CAPO, along with Oregon Human Development Corporation and OHCS, with partner to expand training to migrant workers and BIPOC partners. The special project will benefit underserved community members seeking position within the weatherization program across the state by raising awareness on the weatherization program as a green economic career path, increasing access to training resources that are considerate of cultural and linguistic differences, and expand the capacity of weatherization provider network. We negotiated the timelines. We are currently negotiating our timelines with CAPO and with OTI as we develop their work agreement as terms and conditions that are currently under discussion. We are looking forward to a ribbon cutting ceremony, hopefully this fall of 2023. And as you can currently see in the current picture, we actually have had several of our employees go through this training program that you see in the pictures. And in our facility, we'll actually be having similar actual training positions there. So next, we actually are going to move over to our ORMAP presented by Dan Elliott.
Okay.
Thank you.
Morning, Council. My name is Dan Elliott. I'm the Senior Policy Analyst and Program Advisor for the Energy Services. My pronouns are he, him, his. It is good to see you all this morning again. And I am looking forward to updating you on ORMEP and making good on our goals of expanding that program and updating you on the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Coalition and consultants' impacts and the work that they have done and the work that we'll be doing moving forward with the program. The program manager is Tim Clark. He is our newest addition to the program, and he was unable to be here today. So I get to have the pleasure of sharing all the fantastic work the stakeholders, the consultants, and the team have been doing in moving us forward to improve this program. So I'm going to do a quick update just for those of you that may or need a little memory of the multifamily program. So this was it's a cash incentives program. It's designed to support the energy efficiency upgrades in our affordable multifamily projects. They are primarily geared towards fundamentally our affordable housing projects. So all of our projects that go through our portfolio that come in through our NOFAs, they are prioritized. As you recall, the council years ago put that provision in place to make sure that we had a good coupling of that. It is a very effective gap funding and a very popular funding source for our providers. The goals: energy efficient building design and energy efficient building use. We are trying to influence the design of these projects through our incentives, as well as inform the public or the tenants and the developers on the best use of the operations that these measures can provide to their properties, and reduce overhead and make them more affordable and stabilize the costs incurred in the long-term sustainability necessary in these projects. As you know, that 30, 60 years, that's quite some time. And so we want to make sure that they get off to a good start and that we have stabilized the costs for the tenants as well as any operational costs on the long term. So the program overview is simple. Program funding comes exclusively. It is not a fuel blind, and it is not statewide per se. It is specific funding from the public purpose funds, which started in 1999. They are only for Pacific Power and Portland General Electric service areas. The eligibility requirements that we've established years ago with the council as well, moving forward with this, is to have it's for existing and new construction. It's got to be in PGE or a Pacific Power territory. It's got to be hardwired electrical heating a system, and then it has to meet the affordability requirements of 50% of the units are at or below 80% AMI, and they must remain affordable for at least 10 years. So to give you a little bit of history and background on the program, even though it started in 1999, it has gone through years of evolution to meet the needs and to meet with the priorities as we've learned from it, and we've matched and survived and leveraged other programs and gotten very popular over the time period. So we've gotten such so that we revamped the program, rebuilt the program in March of 2017, and we launched that off, and we had several $1 million of incentives that were available at that time, as the program went on a bit of a hiatus for about 3 years before that, as the department was going through some changes. And what that did is it meant we had quite a bit of incentives to catch up on and to get ahead of. And I'm happy to say that we successfully were able to do that by December of 2019 with Governor Brown's executive order, some assistance that we received, and just the popularity and the streamlining of the program overall. Even with 2020 putting us on hold, when we came to 2020, the bottom line is we ran out of money. Not only did we run out of money, but we had enough on our waiting lists in the form of reservations that we currently have enough reservations and enough on our waiting list that puts us well into the 25-27 biennium. So we have to manage that. It's not a large program. We collectively collect maybe $3 million a year based upon what the public purpose charges provides us, but we are mighty and powerful and very impactful for the projects as they come in. And so it's been quite a bit of time since we had to put it on pause for about a year. But when we put it on pause, we also had some friends in the legislature and stakeholders, as well as the governor's office, that was realizing the need here, and they effectively, recognizing the need there, they made some changes to our program, which I'll get to in a moment. So just to give you an idea, we had 94 properties. This also gives you an idea of how many are in queue for projects, because many of these are coupled and leveraged with our existing projects that we currently have in reservation. And some of these projects haven't quite applied for our NOFA projects, but they will, and they'll show up. So giving an idea of what's in the queue for us overall, when we're looking at, you know, the overall goal of that 36,000, we've got quite a few that we're doing our part, I'm happy to say. But we've got a wait list. The problem with the wait list is we currently had to reassess because we don't have a lot of money. We didn't have a lot of funds. We have a wait list, but the first come, first serve criteria wasn't equitable, was not fair in the amount of money and the distribution and the targeting of what we wanted to do. And we've talked with the council and we've discussed this as well as with other programs in the agency as well. And we've made good on that with the work that we've done. So we didn't have the money, but we had those friends, and they came along with a House Bill 3141 in 2021, and they made changes to that public purpose fund, which also funds, as you can see here, this is just a quick overview of the funding that was done, but they wanted to know, well, what is the need for real? And we were able to show them the need explicitly with actual projects and of what we would need to have and see. and they realized we needed a boost. We needed more funding and we needed more support. And that happily was approved by the legislature in 2021. We began collecting an additional amount of money. They increased the funds to low-income weatherization annually by 60%. So we'll be collecting more money, and that started in 2022. And as we started in 2022, we realized with the additional dollars that would afford more opportunities for services, but it also meant that the waiting list is probably not going to be best served for our goals as an agency and as a state in equitable distribution to those that are highest of need and energy burdened. And I've been before the council many times. You've seen the mapping and what we've been able to do and show as far as the need in the state and how we target the underserved populations and communities, and how that lines up nicely with, well, not surprisingly to those communities, but the data is there and it's being used. So we put together a advisory body. This is the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Coalition, and they formed to advise our program and to help us build a better car, build a better vehicle that meets with the goals. And so they came through with a vision for us. They worked with multiple stakeholders throughout the state over the last year, and we are launching the program next week, and I'll get to this, but here's the goal: customers of color, those for whom English is not their first language, customers living in rural communities, and people navigating low incomes. And so these are some of the things that they have in the vision. So the preliminary objectives that we gave them was to modify and develop the policies and practices to eliminate systemic racism in how we do business and how we operate our allocations and funding, and earlier there was discussions around that here today as well. But we wanted to be able to. They also number two, help the program team equitably engage with all the applicable communities and customers. And so one of the things that they came up with here, I'm sorry, I apologize. This is my coalition. This is our coalition, of which I am so proud of these folks for stepping in to help consult us. They're from all various parts of the state and backgrounds. We also have a facilitation team that helped put this group together, of which they were able to advise us on and provide a proposal as those consultants. And I hope someday to be able to have some time to bring them here to meet and greet as we've moved through. But they have done fantastic work, and we're so pleased with what they've been able to help us do. And so long and short of it, we were able to change with their recommendations, and we just had rules changes, and we just had a public hearing, and we're launching this next week. To begin, we're shifting from that first come, first served to competitively ranked with new DEI focus criteria that we have, they've set aside and we've set aside and we've agreed to move forward with, that works for all stakeholders. And we're going to use that to, as projects come in, they are going to go on a list. And just like our other energy programs, our federal programs have prioritizations as they get on a waiting list, depending on where their priority is. That gives them points, that moves them up the list as they move forward, so that we can hit the highest of need and the highest targeted areas that match with what we know from our research has afforded. And so these are the criteria that we have. We're going to be opening up 2 rounds so that that meets consistently with the NOFAs as well. We'll make changes as we need, and we are going to track and report back on what this is, and we'll make changes as we need moving forward with the background and the elements that we have. So we did a lot of research on this as we that we have the background on, and the consultants did as well. And we were able to actually dial in some of those components to really see where the highest part. So I wanted to give you a little bit of a visual on some of the criteria that we use. These are two of the criteria in that last page, the high priority area index and the ethnicity and race. Again, I know some of you know how I feel about census tract information, which is great. It's what we use, but this matches very well, and there's consistency with both of these as they weigh out. The red areas, as you can see, in the blue areas, highlight those borders there, highlight where the service territories are, the PGE. The only thing that I lament about the success of being burdened with demand for the ORMET program, when before 2015, it was hard to come by. This has been a complete turnaround. The aspects of this is a great vehicle, but it's limited to 2 utility service areas. And it's a great tool. It's a great service. It's getting better and better and expanding, and it'll be expanding even more with the Inflation Reduction Act monies that are coming. And we'll be working closely with ODO, the Oregon Department of Energy, when they receive those dollars here in the coming year. And we'll be matching ORMET dollars on their platform for our customers as well. So we're really excited about this, and we are happy to answer any questions you may have with this update. Thanks for the time.
Council questions or feedback? Well, hearing none at this point, I'll say thank you for the presentation. Important work, and glad to learn more about it. And now we move along to the Government Affairs Division and Director Nicole Sting. Are you ready, Nicole?
I am. Good morning, Deputy Director Yant, Chair Hall, members of the council. Good to be with you this morning. Again, for the record, Nicole Sting, Assistant Director of Government Relations here at Oregon Housing and Community Services. And while I pull up my screen and get ready to share, I'll just add, I think this might go down for the record for how early we are in terms of our timing today. So glad to be, to hopefully get us through the finish line early. Now, I want to, before diving in, just take a moment and reflect on what a whirlwind of a legislative session we just had. Folks might remember there was a number of times we came to you and said, we're not quite sure we'll get to the end of the session. We're not quite sure what that means. I'm very happy to report out that we concluded the session on time before the constitutional deadline, just 7 hours before, but we made it over that finish line with, as was said before, a historic suite of policies and investments for the agency. I want to again just call out, this is a first step with the council. This is an introduction. We'll be going through a lot of information. As it relates to implementation, you all will hear much more about this as time moves forward. And there are certain aspects of implementation that will be more plug and play that you might not see as much. So we'll certainly continue to have those conversations in the coming weeks and months. To just take a step back and look at what came to us, want to just share the snapshot. I put the link for the 2023 Legislative Highlight Summary document in the chat. It's also available for our internet viewing audience on the Government Relations website for OHCS. This is not divided in programmatic divisions, but rather in key areas. So first and foremost, the legislatures made the most significant investment in supply and addressing our supply side crisis. We've talked to the council quite a bit about the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis and the problems identified in terms of supply. The legislature put forward incredible investments, mainly in bonds, but also general fund, to invest in existing programs, new strategies, and expanded strategies. We'll talk more about that as we get through the programmatic divisions later. The legislature also invested over $400 million in homeless services and housing stability. It's broken up in 2 chunks here on the slide. The first one being emergency response, both in the executive order region and outside in the rural Oregon continuum of care. And that is for shelter access, rehousing, and long-term rental assistance. And then there's an additional investment on that second, or rather third bullet point about community homelessness resources. So that's continuing operational support for Project Turnkey developments, navigation centers, expanding our partnerships with tribal communities as they work to combat homelessness in their region, as well as supporting tenant organizations and more. The legislature continued investments across the continuum with $20 million specifically on homeownership investments. I will call out some of the homeownership investments are in supply, so that number is a little bit lower than what we'll actually see in terms of the homeownership division, but that's additional investments outside of the brick and mortar to build homes. It does include a manufactured home replacement program that the agency has been operating for the last 3 or 4 years. Last, certainly not least, the agency received resources to continue language access investments and expand our work and approaches in language access through an assessment that'll help us better be prepared next biennium to build in language access translation costs into the work that we're doing. And I'll go ahead and just, again, dive right in, focusing first on the agency-wide issues. I put the omnibus and budget bills here so you have the links. I'm not going to discuss them. You'll see them throughout the slides, but I will first pivot to the language access investment. I'll talk more about what didn't get into our budget that we were expecting, but I'll call out the training and technical assistant investment that we spent quite a bit of time developing with this council, with our stakeholders, was not adopted by the legislature. We're grateful to receive the language access, but do want to call that out as something missing for members of the council that were part of the agency request budget development process. The other big win and exciting win for us is Senate Bill 892. It is a statute cleanup bill. It does a number of things, most importantly, and what this council might remember from our rules coordinator, JC Davis, coming before you a number of times. The council's role in rules is now cleared. The council will have a consultative role in agency rulemaking, and ultimate approval will lie with Director Bell. That will hopefully reduce some of the redundancies we see in rulemaking approval, and just want to give a huge appreciation and shout out to Chair Hall, who testified twice on this bill, and we saw strong bipartisan support as it moved across the finish line. I'll call out 2 other bills that the agency doesn't have a direct role in implementation, but will certainly impact our work. Senate Bill 606 creates a task force to analyze the compensation of nonprofits. As we think about our training and technical assistance investment, that's directly tied. DAS is running the task force. We will have a seat at the table, as will other state agencies and nonprofits. But that's certainly something to watch as we think and expand the types of partners that OHCS works with across the housing continuum. And last, we're also there's also a task force to examine and identify better ways to move forward tribal consultation. So just 2 key pieces of work that we're not moving that will certainly impact the way we do business here at OHCS. And I'll next move into the Affordable Rental Housing Division, which is the bulk of the resources. We received $604.2 million of Article 11Q bonds. That includes issuance fees. So in terms of program, that's $600 million divided between the LIFT homeownership, LIFT rental, and permanent supportive housing programs. That'll also be paired with $50 million of lottery bonds to preserve affordable housing. The agency had 1 request in the agency request budget and another request that made it into the governor's end of session housing package that was secured. The first one's pre-development resources that Director or Affordable Rental Housing Director Natasha Detweiler-Davy talked about a bit. And in addition, a really exciting investment that we've heard about from our partners, we're glad to bring forward, was a $4 million investment to establish a permanent supportive housing risk mitigation fund. That fund will support the operating costs and longevity for permanent supportive housing units that might have increased in insurance costs for additional claims based on the population and acuity of the population they serve. And I can't not note, I will just take a moment and note and celebrate, the agency is receiving quite a bit more private activity bonds in the upcoming fiscal year than we did or calendar year than we did in this current calendar year. Of course, as you heard Ms. Isom speak about, that's incredibly important for utilizing our LIFT dollars as well. And now that was what we asked for, what we thought was coming. Of course, what happens with the legislative session, there's a whole tranche of funds that we didn't quite ask for, didn't quite expect to come to us. The first being resources for grant resources for agricultural housing that's based in community. It's basically a general fund version of the agricultural worker housing tax credit, but the way the statute is written, it is a new program for the agency to stand up and implement. There's $20 million of modular housing grant funds that we received as part of the early session package. We have an additional $20 million for an affordable housing loan guarantee fund that can support both affordable housing and moderate income developments. And last, certainly not least, is another new program for our affordable rental housing division. It is a preservation-based tax credit to encourage folks that are selling homes that have an expiring affordability to sell to a nonprofit or another entity that will continue that use. So those are the two new programs, are certainly ones you'll hear about quite a bit as we move through this next biennium. Now we'll shift and take a look at the bills that impacted the Affordable Rental Housing Division. We have two OHCS bills that made it over the finish line. The first one is Senate Bill 225 that addresses private activity bonds, closes the blackout period, meaning we can close on bond deals right now. If this bill had not passed, that would not be the case. So just take a quick moment to celebrate that win. The bill's been signed, so we're good to go. The other piece, it allows the agency to suballocate private activity bonds to public housing authorities who can then issue the bond. So it gives us additional statutory flexibility there. Another bill you'll certainly hear about is House Bill 2761. It expands OHCS's ability to fund mixed income developments. You as the council have an important role in determining if there is a cap to the amount of non-affordable units that can be in a building where we're funding the affordable unit. So there's certainly more conversation to come now. It's really a best practice to move towards mixed income, and we're excited to have this flexibility. The agency will also undergo rulemaking to determine how cost segregation is done between common features in a mixed income development. So more to come there. On the tax bill side, I'll call out 2071. That is where the $3 million tax credit lives for the new preservation tax credit I mentioned. And then a few pieces I'll call out here. First and foremost, we have a new reporting requirement and a new role for council to consider as it relates to accessible units and ensuring that folks with disabilities have access to OHCS housing, another one you'll likely hear about. We also saw the codification of the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis that this council's heard about on a number of occasions, as well as updates to our programs and allowances for rental units. I won't go through all of these. This slide deck will be on the Housing Stability Council website with active links if you're interested in diving in more. And now we'll shift to what is probably the most confusing aspect of our budget, and that is the investments related to housing stabilization and our special projects divisions. We have here just a chart that outlines where the funds will go by region, and then also what package they were from, whether they're part of the early session package or the end of session package. It's incredible investments to expand shelter bed operation, to continue operation for those shelter beds, expanding unit access, rehousing efforts, providing long-term rental assistance. And really the EO regions are following that, the multi-agency coordinating commission structure and plans and being deployed in that vein. And then there's additional balance of state resources for creating shelter beds and continuing rehousing efforts. I will note the $39 million you see there, that's in the special purpose appropriation, the SPA as we call it. The agency will need to come back to the Legislative Emergency Board to receive permission to receive those funds. So that one will be a bit delayed. We do need to go through a process to work with the legislature to release those funds. And you'll likely hear about those investments later on. For the statewide investments, the main thing to consider here is really just the incredible amount of homelessness prevention or rental assistance really investments that's being divided up between three main activities. First is the ORDAP program through community action agencies to provide rental assistance. Secondarily is the eviction prevention rapid response program that's being administered by a third party with referrals from the Oregon Law Center, really designed to be that last stop to prevent evictions. And then there's another kind of bucket of those funds that will be going out through culturally specific organizations. And that was really the emergency response. Now shifting to the ongoing community efforts here, you'll see two columns on your screen. The first is the early session and then the end of session. In total, we have $10 million to support our tribal, our nine federally recognized tribes throughout the state. And in addition, we have two different kind of pots of EHA funds, emergency housing assistance funds. There's an emergency housing assistance youth program that was established in House Bill 2001 and funded in House Bill 5019. And in addition, there was a emergency housing assistance PETS program to support the pets of folks experiencing homelessness that received a $1 million allocation in our budget. On top of those two things, you'll see some direct allocations to tenant organizations, as well as resources to continue some of the operational support we provided this biennium to Project Turnkey shelters, navigation centers, and other homeless services facilities. And now to take a step back and look at the policy bills related to the Housing Stabilization Division, Senate Bill 893 was one introduced kind of mid of the session as we began to identify new program or new issues related to operations and some of the recommendations that came out in March from the House Bill 2100 task force. It directed the agency to continue the work related to those task force recommendations and planning with the task force on homelessness and racial disparities, and it clarified OHCS's statutory authority as it relates to homeless services grants and housing stabilization grants. It also, much like the EHA program itself, removes approval of grant making to the executive director while having the council have an important role in creating program frameworks and engaging in program frameworks, as is the case with most of our resources. House Bill 3417 is an important strategy related to the executive order work. It allows us to retool the Housing Choice Landlord Guarantee Program to also provide as assurance to landlords that are participating in rehousing efforts related to the executive order and emergency response funds. So that's exciting bill that made it over the finish line. There's two important energy bills. Some of them are more technical in nature, and I do want to call out House Bill 3430, which includes a number of directions for us to work with the Department of Energy to create a one-stop shop as it relates to energy programs. In addition, House Bill 3409 directs the agencies to consider actions to reduce greenhouse gases. That will be certainly a big lift from the team you just heard about before I joined. And last, in House Bill 2070, one you'll hear quite a bit as we go forward, the individual development account tax credit was expanded. Again, this will be on another slide. We had a $5 million general fund one-time request that was not funded by the legislature, but they did extend the tax credit. There's a few bills that OHCS doesn't have a strong implementation role that are really important to the people we serve. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'll call out just how Senate Bill 611, which addresses what we're seeing with the storm of incredibly high inflation rates and the 7% plus consumer price index rent stabilization cap. Because what we've seen with inflation, the legislature took a step to cap beyond the 7% plus CPI, where in the state, regardless of what inflation is, no rent increases can be above 10%. If inflation is 2%, then rent increases would then be limited to 9%. So just as an additional cap on the existing rent stabilization policies in the state. And I'm going to mention one more because I do think it's important. House Bill 3395 had a number of land use policies to it. One thing that's incredibly important to our work here is the shelter supersiting authority. It indefinitely extended that authority to local governments, which has been a huge aid as we stand up the emergency order shelters. All right, and we're shifting now over to the home ownership division. In this division, we're glad to see that a number of the requests we put forward were funded. Again, a portion of the general Article 11Q bond resources will go to lift homeownership, and we have $5 million of general fund to pair with that. As the council knows well, that general fund is incredibly important to ensuring lift homeownership reaches our rural communities and builds to the density we need to see in urban centers. The agency also received $7.5 million of down payment assistance to pair with our lending products. I didn't mention this, but in Senate Bill 892 above, that gave us permission to loan down payment assistance with our mortgage lending products, which is an important strategy as we think about our bond lending products, rather, which is an important strategy as we think about which is the best tool to use given environmental factors. In addition, we received $2.5 million to expand homeownership for manufactured housing. And essentially, this is a program for older or unsafe manufactured homes. It helps, provides grants to decommission those and provides loans to bring them back to life. So the loans will allow the homeowners to get a low interest rate, non-chattel loan to purchase a manufactured home. And last, and I apologize, I'm seeing it twice on my screen here. I didn't do a great double check of the slides here, but the legislative additions on the right are the same two bullet points you see on the left. It's not two separate things. We received $7.5 million as a plug and play resource really to push through to the network for Oregon Affordable Housing to create a new low-income mortgage lending product that is designed to be a 15 to 20-year product to work with community land trust models. And again, as the legislature has done for a number of years, there is a one-time investment in foreclosure avoidance counseling as part of the agency's budget this year. There's some key bills to keep in mind, first of which is an omnibus manufactured housing bill that an agency legislative concept was adopted into. That's House Bill 3151. In terms of what we asked for, it expands the Dispute Resolution Advisory Committee and expands a sunset on our ability to provide grants to legal aid entities working with tenants and provide some flexibility about the use of those grant funds to ensure they're the best type of grant for our nonprofit providers. The bill also includes a number of clarifications to manufactured housing landlord tenant law, including clarifying who is responsible for what infrastructure as it relates to disaster recovery. That was an issue that the sponsor, Representative Marsh, saw in her community in Jackson County. Other important policy bills are listed here. I'll call out one of the bigger bills. It doesn't have dollars associated with it, but it is a new program for the agency. In House Bill 2071, the legislature expanded the Oregon Affordable Housing Tax Credit to serve limited equity homeownership cooperatives. And it did not provide additional resources for that tax credit. So it'll be some work for the agency to determine how to allocate resources between potential activities for OAHTC. And there's a number of complex compliance requirements associated with that statute that the agency will need to work through. So that is not a new dollar amount program, but certainly a new program as it relates to administrative complexity and implementation. And I'll also call out the bill that I mentioned earlier, House Bill 3395, that had a number of land use components of it. It addressed statutory changes related to homeownership associations and condo law that have been challenging for our partners developing community land trust model homes. So there's some important changes in here that impact our partners that the agency won't necessarily be implementing, but are important for the council to note. Last, certainly not least, is our Disaster Recovery and Resiliency Division. There's just two bills from there, really, none that need immediate implementation. House Bill 3215 was one we designed. It repurposes an account that supports a immediate response role in disaster response, but not a recovery role that is better aligned with the agency's mission in disaster recovery. House Bill 3215 provides a general account for the legislature to use post-disaster to aid in recovery of homes lost in the community, and it provides expanded authority for OHCS to work and procure contractors to directly rebuild homes instead of providing grants to home builders builders to then work with contractors. It's really a trauma-informed practice to take on some of that work for survivors and ensure that we're doing what we can to help survivors become whole and move forward in future disasters. And last, certainly not least, is House Bill 3462. That bill was introduced after some of the experiences of survivors working with the FEMA and the immediate sheltering efforts, particularly for undocumented survivors. They felt there was not sufficient resources or programming to help them live and survive post-disaster. So this requires state agencies to utilize resources to address disparities in federal programs if there are state resources available. It, in our minds, really codifies the work we're trying to do now and provides additional direction and ensuring folks are made whole post-disaster. I mentioned this slide a few times, and there's quite a things missing from the budget. I will again underline and underscore this is the largest state fund biennial budget we have ever had. That said, there's some things we wanted that we didn't quite get. So I'll just quickly walk through those. I know a number of you were deeply involved in the implementation, or excuse me, the build of the agency request budget and the outreach therein. And the investments we didn't see, as I mentioned, are training and technical assistance investments, general funds for the individual development account. We did not receive operating dollars for the homeless management information system. And as part of the governor's end of session housing package, she requested $10.5 billion for local government homelessness response. Those resources were not included in the end of session housing package and were not allocated to the agency. The other big miss is House Bill 3414. That was one of the governor's chief housing policy bills that did not make it through. If those of you have been paying attention to the news, you might know some of the drama and last minute changes related to that bill. It made it through the House on a tight vote and then died on the Senate floor on the last day of session by one vote. So the bill would have adjusted land use laws, particularly related to the urban growth boundary, established the Housing Accountability and Production Office, and provided $10 million to the Department of Land Conservation and Development for education, technical assistance, and other support to local governments. So the governor is committed to bringing this forward in the short session. We certainly will see more pieces move, but the controversial aspect of that bill was really around the changes to the UGB and what folks hoped to see, or what some environmental groups had some concerns with. So again, more to come on that piece. In addition to what's missing, I want to just call out there's some investments that were decreased. Overall, the both preservation bond investments and LIFT and PSH bond investments were lowered fairly significantly for both. We had requested $770 million of Article 11Q for LIFT, and we had requested another $130 million for PSH. We received a total of 600, so that is a decrease, and we received about half of what we asked for preservation. For the Rural Oregon Continuum of Care rehousing efforts, we also received a modest decrease there as well, and a fairly significant decrease from the initial governor's recommended budget from request to what was received in our budget as it relates to down payment assistance. So to remind you, our initial request was somewhere around $20 million in the ARB, and we're walking away with about 7.5. Regardless, we still have an incredible amount of resources to move forward, and we're excited to move on to what's next. Again, I'll underscore what Deputy Director Yant said at the beginning. More implementation planning is to come. This is just kind of a taste, a first bite at the apple as ideas are brought forward and brought to this body. The Housing Stability Council has been identified as a critical path to implementation, and you'll hear more as things move forward. We'll also be in close coordination with the governor in implementation. Last, certainly not least, the government relations team is, one moment here. Ooh. Sorry, talking too long, a bit of a frog in my throat, 1 second. Sorry about We have additional, it's still there. Caleb, do you want to round out the implementation planning talk real quick?
Sure, absolutely. It's contagious. I think, yeah, I was able to mention at the top implementation plan, so a lot more to come on that. And then I know the government affairs team, government relations team is going to be providing a digest with a lot more information that will be available on our website. And I think that's a link there on that PowerPoint slide, which will be up on the Housing Stability Council under today's meeting here shortly after we're done.
Great. And thank you so much for the assist. I just needed to drink some water, cough it out. We're good. Before I turn it over for questions, just want to take a moment and maybe a bit of reflection. I've been with the agency. This is my third long session with the agency, and we've seen kind of different levels of staffing and support for the government relations team. I want to call out, we have a full government relations team with legislative coordinators supporting each programmatic division, a rules full-time rules coordinator really for the first time as an agency, and the difference it has made in our ability to stay on top of things, communicate with legislators. So I want to take this time to extend my personal gratitude for the government relations team that you're not seeing today, but do a lot of the heavy lifting as it relates to this work. So just was a long session, a bit of a dramatic session, but I'm incredibly grateful for the work of that team and want to acknowledge their work publicly.
Excuse me, I'm having trouble with my mute button. Thank you, Nicole. I mean, you know, I was just thinking we tend to use that word historic a lot around these parts these last few years, but it's justified because I think the executive and legislature have asked for results and they've seen results, and look forward to more to come. Any council questions, comments, feedback for Nicole? Okay, then I think it's time for us to wrap things up. And if there's no further business to come before the council, we are adjourned. See you next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.